The story you are about to witness begins with a snap of the fingers, a sharp, arrogant sound that, in the silent luxury of the Pinnacle restaurant in Chicago, echoed louder than any fire alarm. The city stretched out below, a tapestry of steel and glass. But in that penthouse, where wealth sat for lunch, the universe narrowed down to a single table and two individuals separated by a moral abyss. Blake Harrison, the CEO of Horizon Dynamics, was the personification of the soulless American success story. Dressed in a bespoke suit, the cut as sharp as his tongue, he exuded a cold superiority that prevented him from seeing anyone who couldn't increase his fortune. For him, the world consisted of predators and prey, and he was there to feast. His business lunch with a potential investor, Mr. Peterson, was supposed to be flawless, and any imperfection he considered a personal offense. Blake was impatient, his hawk-like gaze fixed on the wine glass that, in his opinion, did not meet his standard of excellence. On the other hand, the figure of silent dignity stood Chloe Davis. She wore her black and white work uniform, an outfit she wore with pride, for it was the symbol of her effort and the means to pay her tuition at Northwestern University, where she studied business administration. Chloe was a young woman in her early 20s with a bright future in her eyes and an unwavering focus. But at that moment, she was just the waitress summoned by that rude, possessive sound. She approached the table, her body slightly tense, the smell of lavender from her apron contrasting with the aroma of Blake's French cologne. Blake's voice was a hissing whip. "Waitress," he called, the sound of his finger snaps still reverberating. His inability to use her name or even look at her name tag was the first layer of contempt. Chloe stopped, holding her order pad firmly. Blake gestured to the wine glass, and the gesture contained all his arrogance. "This Cabernet is undrinkable," he declared, as if pronouncing a universal law. "You, of course, wouldn't understand the palate, being used to whatever you drink on campus or in your neighborhood. But I am a customer, and I own a fortune that would make your future look like a joke. I demand you call the sommelier and, more importantly, that you clean this glass, since your servant's fingerprints make me nauseated. You stain the rim, and stained glasses reflect poorly on my business, on my value." He pushed the glass toward her, subtly staining the white linen tablecloth with red wine. Chloe felt the heat of blood rise up her neck. It wasn't just the public humiliation. It was a destruction of her dignity, the devaluation of all her effort because of her service status. Her eyes met Blake's for a second, and what she saw was not anger, but the icy void of absolute disinterest. He was performing, and she was just a disposable prop. Mr. Peterson, the investor, coughed discreetly into his hand, but remained silent, a silence that, to Chloe, was the world's complicity. She picked up the glass firmly, feeling the tips of her fingers tingle. Her voice, however, was the perfection of professionalism, a control that cost her every ounce of inner strength. "I will call the sommelier immediately so he can arrange the replacement, sir. My apologies for the inconvenience." But Blake wasn't finished. He stopped her again. "Wait," he said, taking the glass back and holding it up mockingly. He studied her from head to toe. "You're a pretty girl, young with potential. It's a waste. If you use that beauty for something useful, something profitable, instead of chasing tips to pay for old books, maybe you'd have a future. Here, take this." He took a crisp, new $100 bill and threw it onto the table, pushing it toward her with his fingertip, as if dismissing a pet. "Buy yourself a decent outfit. And now leave. You ruined my lunch, and my time is worth far more than your annual salary." Chloe looked at the $100 bill, folded at the corner. The piece of paper, which should have been a symbol of power and reward, became the emblem of her enslavement and his contempt. She did not take the money. Instead, she turned and, with her head held higher than it had ever been, she called the sommelier and exited the scene, the silence of her withdrawal being the only sound that mattered. That silence was her declaration of war. As she walked toward the kitchen with the image of the $100 bill still blazing on her retina, Chloe's world broke apart. The physical pain of the humiliation transformed into a surgical coldness, a terrifying clarity. He called me trash. He quantified my life and devalued it. He didn't just deny my effort, he denied my existence. The anger was no longer a fleeting warmth. It was a solid block of ice lodged in her chest, determining every beat of her heart. She couldn't afford to cry. Tears would be a weakness that would confirm Blake's contempt. She looked at herself in the service area mirror. The waitress there in the black and white uniform was about to die. Blake Harrison, in his blind arrogance, had just made the biggest mistake of his corporate life. He had turned an idealistic student into a focused predator, giving her the only goal worth more than her diploma. You want power, Blake? You want a value that cannot be quantified? I will give you the real value, the value of destruction. She knew the revenge needed to be total and complete. It wasn't enough to ruin his company. She had to ruin his legacy, his dignity, and his identity, the triple blow he had dealt her. She couldn't use the law, couldn't use the police. She needed to use his own system, the system of money and manipulation. Chloe walked back to the table, not to take the tip, but to pick up the $100 bill Blake had thrown. Her fingers touched the bill, and she felt the texture of the offense. She put it in her apron pocket, not as money, but as a symbol and a weapon. It would be the proof, the constant reminder of her vow. That night, Chloe Davis didn't return to Northwestern with just resentment. She returned with a cold, long-term plan. She looked at the $100 bill on her study desk, and her voice, now silent, was a relentless promise. From today forward, Blake Harrison, you are not my enemy. You are my doctoral project, and your final cost will be the complete ruin of everything you have built. The waitress had died, and the predator was ready to begin her hunt. 7 years later, the birth of Anna Dubois. The crumpled $100 bill given by Blake Harrison as a handout was not spent, it was framed. Hanging above Chloe's study desk, it served as an unholy altar, reminding her daily of the price of her dignity. That night, after the humiliation at the Pinnacle, Chloe did not cry, but she did something far more dangerous. She recalculated. She rewrote the course of her life with a maniacal precision, understanding that to destroy Blake, she needed to become the exact opposite of the servant he despised. She needed to embody the coldness and power he valued most. The waitress Chloe Davis was methodically sacrificed to make way for the Wall Street consultant Anna Dubois. Anna was not a pseudonym. She was an identity constructed with the singular purpose of revenge. Anna's smile was rehearsed, her suits were impeccable, and every step in her career was an arrow aimed at the heart of Blake's empire. She left her course at Northwestern, realizing the pace was too slow. Instead, she plunged into forensic finance, working for investment banks notorious for their lack of ethics, absorbing every technique of hostile acquisition and corporate dismantling. She was a sponge, thirsty for power and destructive knowledge. Time was her only enemy, but she used it with military discipline. The transformation wasn't just external. She had to kill the empathy she felt for her former self, the vulnerability of Chloe. Anna was an analysis machine, driven by the memory of that humiliation at the Pinnacle. Her MBA came from a prestigious university, but the real cost was the sacrifice of her youth and any personal ties. She had no friends, only contacts. She had no pleasure, only progress. Anna's success in the world of mergers and acquisitions was meteoric, but no one knew the true engine behind her icy ambition. Anna's first step wasn't to attack, but to map the weakness. She knew that Horizon Dynamics was, like most arrogant empires, sustained by three pillars of hypocrisy and corruption. First and most vital, the Charity Foundation, Foundation for Urban Progress. Blake used the foundation to siphon millions meant for shelters and public schools. It was a massive tax fraud buried in a complex network of shell companies. To the world, Blake was a philanthropist. To Anna, he was a thief of hope. This would be the final ammunition. Second, the paper heir. Blake's son, Daniel Harrison, was the definition of pampered mediocrity. Blake had installed him as VP of Operations, and Daniel covered his own incompetence with low-level corruption and inflated contracts. Daniel's weakness was proof that Blake's legacy was built on sand. Destroying Daniel was the path to destroying Blake's line of succession. Third, the hidden debt. Horizon Dynamics was burdened by corporate debt that Blake was desperately trying to conceal through aggressive mergers and balance sheet falsification. He needed a big win on Wall Street to survive, and Anna would be the reason for his failure. With the map in hand, Anna initiated the chokehold phase. She wouldn't use her own name for the sabotage actions. Instead, she created an anonymous investment fund, Nemesis Capital, operating out of Delaware with the discretion of a ghost. Through Nemesis, she began buying and liquidating small software companies and patents crucial to the Horizon Dynamics supply chain. With every Nemesis acquisition, Blake felt a squeeze. Horizon's production cost rose, innovation fell, and Blake's reputation as a market leader began to be questioned by investors. He screamed at his executives, blaming terrorist competitors, never suspecting that the terrorist was a silent consultant he had taught himself to despise. Anna's 7 years of work were not just financial, they were a work of patience. She used the framed $100 bill as her mantra. Each day was one step closer. The point of no return was reached when Horizon Dynamics became so vulnerable that the board, tired of Blake's authoritarianism, decided to act in secret. The infiltration materialized. When the Horizon Dynamics board hired Anna Dubois' consulting firm, unaware that she was behind the company's crisis. They hired her for a complete risk audit. Blake, in his arrogance, accepted the anonymous consultant, seeing her only as a tool to blame third parties. He could barely wait to have her under his command, not realizing that the wolf had just been invited into the henhouse. Anna had gained unrestricted access to the central servers, and, more importantly, she would have to face Blake face to face. The next step would take her back to the hell she swore to destroy. The consultant Anna Dubois had been invited into the lion's den. Her first week at Horizon Dynamics was an exercise in superhuman patience. She moved through the marble corridors of the 50th floor, observed with apprehension by the executives and with lust by the older men. To everyone, Anna was the cold salvation brought in by the board. To Blake Harrison, she was just an expensive temporary tool. And worst of all, he had no idea who she was. The agonizing proximity was Anna's new hell and her fuel.
She sat in the same boardroom Blake used as his throne, observing his power mannerisms. He treated her with an unbearable, yet familiar, condescension. Blake never called her by her name. It was always consultant, delivered with a tone that suggested glorified servant. Her lengthy internal monologues became the essence of this section of the script. He doesn't remember. He doesn't remember my face, my name, the smell of that humiliation. To him, I was just a bug he stepped on. That is the true offense and my greatest leverage. In one of the first meetings, Anna was explaining the complexity of Horizon's corporate debt, but Blake was more interested in reaffirming his dominance. He interrupted her in the middle of a crucial financial equation. "Consultant, my coffee is getting cold. Would you mind bringing me a double espresso? You look like you could use a stretch before burdening us with your charts." The insult was double, belittling her intellect and throwing her back into her role as a waitress. The executives laughed nervously. Anna, however, complied. She walked to the executive kitchen, liquid anger solidifying into resolution. She brought the coffee back to Blake's table with surgical precision and resumed her presentation exactly where he had interrupted her, without a single deviation, without a tremor in her voice. The obedience was her performance, her camouflage. Blake chuckled and, unknowingly, gave Anna another hour of relentless motivation. This routine of subtle humiliation repeated for weeks, extending the scene of psychological torture. He invited her to working lunches only to ignore her while talking on the phone. He asked her to fetch his clothes from the dry cleaner. Each gesture of contempt was cataloged by Anna as an interest rate added to the final price of revenge. The peak of this proximity came with the Pinnacle test. Blake, feeling victorious with Anna's first superficial findings, which she planted to distract him, decided to celebrate and, at the same time, test the new consultant. He invited her to dinner at the Pinnacle, the restaurant of the humiliation. The scene of Anna's return to the Pinnacle must be slow and painful. She wore a black silk dress, contrasting sharply with the uniform of 7 years ago. Blake was waiting for her at the exact same table where he had insulted her. As she sat down, Anna felt the weight of the memory, the smell of cocktails, the murmur of wealth. Everything was exactly the same. Blake began the dinner with cold charm. He was trying to flirt, offering her an expensive wine. "Miss Dubois, you seem to have a more sophisticated palate than most of the people who serve here. I'm sure you'll appreciate this." He used the exact same phrase, altering only the last word. Anna's heart pounded, but her face remained expressionless. She accepted the wine and looked directly into his eyes, her gaze a chasm of memory. "I value quality, Mr. Harrison, but what I value most is memory and care in execution, and the flawless execution of a plan," she said, toasting coldly. Blake didn't grasp the depth of the sentence. He merely smiled, interpreting it as a compliment to his sharpness. He doesn't remember. And he is sitting exactly where he called me trash. The satisfaction was almost unbearable. During dinner, Anna manipulated the conversation to get the last access she needed. Under the pretense that she needed raw data for her final pre-merger audit, she convinced Blake to give her the master password to Horizon Dynamics' central servers, a code not even his son Daniel had. Blake's arrogance in trusting her surface beauty and competence blinded him. He handed her the key to the vault. The data strike was executed that very night. Anna returned to her apartment not to sleep, but to work. Sitting in front of her monitors, she used the master password. The unrestricted access to the servers allowed her to locate the final target, the electronic paper trail of the fraud in the Foundation for Urban Progress. She downloaded the emails, bank statements, and documents that proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that Blake had siphoned millions meant for shelters and schools. The evidence was encrypted and sent to a digital vault, ready to be revealed. The revenge was sealed. The next act took place the following morning. Anna called a secret meeting with the Horizon Dynamics board, excluding Blake and Daniel. She did not present performance charts. She presented proof of criminal fraud. "Gentlemen," Anna began, her voice serious and unwavering, "my audit is complete. The merger Mr. Harrison plans tomorrow is a sham. Horizon Dynamics is insolvent, and more importantly, Mr. Harrison is about to commit federal fraud. He has been diverting charity funds for years. If you sign this merger, you will be complicit in a crime." The board, shocked and terrified, knew the only way to save their names and their fortunes was to deliver Blake. They agreed to cooperate, ensuring they would be present at the climax. Anna's plan was not just financial. It was an act of final moral justice. Time was running out. The shareholder meeting for the merger that will destroy Blake is scheduled for tomorrow. The stage is set. The revenge is about to be served.
The grand ballroom of a luxury hotel on Wall Street was packed with shareholders, investors, and the business press. The air was electrified with the promise of the merger Blake Harrison was about to announce. He was on the verge of finalizing his biggest play, saving Horizon Dynamics from the insolvency that, ironically, Anna Dubois herself had orchestrated. Blake Harrison stood on the stage, exultant. The spotlight focused on his impeccable suit. He radiated the blind confidence of a shark that smells blood. His wife, Tiffany, was in the front row, smiling falsely for the cameras. Next to her, Daniel, the inept son and heir, tried to look important. Blake began his speech with his usual arrogance, boasting about his vision and how he was the only one capable of leading the company through market turbulence. Sitting discreetly in the second row, dressed in a charcoal silk suit, was Anna. She did not look like a guest. She looked like a judge. In her hand, hidden beneath the fabric, she held a tiny USB dongle, the digital detonator of her plan. She looked at Blake, and the internal monologue intensified. "You are smiling, Blake. You are about to sign a $1 billion contract, but what you will really sign is your sentence. 7 years, and it all comes down to this second." Blake extended the pen. "With this signature," he declared to the auditorium, his voice grave and triumphant, "Horizon Dynamics will become the largest powerhouse in the market." He was ready to sign the merger documents that would save him. The instant punishment was served. At the exact instant the tip of the pen touched the paper, Anna pressed the button on the dongle. The action was imperceptible. The giant screen behind Blake, which displayed the Horizon Dynamics logo, flickered and was hijacked. The logo was replaced by an image that made the entire auditorium hold its breath. It wasn't a virus. It was a brutal truth. In bold red and black letters, the headline of a federal document appeared. SEC filing confirms federal investigation into tax fraud and embezzlement at Horizon Dynamics. Right below, the most destructive phrase, "Millions stolen from the Foundation for Urban Progress charity." Chaos erupted. Screams,
the sound of falling chairs and camera flashes exploding. The auditorium turned into a pandemonium. Blake froze, the pen suspended in the air, his body paralyzed. He turned slowly toward the screen, and all the color drained from his face. His empire had just been exposed as a fraud. Anna stood up and walked calmly down the center aisle, stealing everyone's attention. She looked like an apparition. Blake saw her, but his brain was still struggling to understand the betrayal. He tried to scream at the technicians to turn off the screen, but it was too late. Anna climbed the stage steps with the dignity of someone ascending a podium. She picked up the microphone Blake had dropped. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice powerful but calm, dominating the chaos. "I am Anna Dubois, and what you see on the screen is not a hacker attack. It is the audit that Mr. Harrison's own board requested. He is guilty." Blake finally recognized her, not as the Wall Street consultant, but as the girl in the crumpled uniform. The memory of the humiliation at the Pinnacle hit him with the force of a punch. He pointed his finger at her, trembling. "You, the waitress from Pinnacle," he hissed, his voice failing. Anna looked at him, and the smile she gave held no human warmth. It was the smile of implacable justice. "Correction, Blake. I was Chloe Davis, and you called me trash. You told me to buy a decent outfit instead of paying for my college. You taught me that the only language you understand is the language of total power." She took another step toward him, the news cameras locked on her face. "I am not just Anna Dubois, the consultant. I am the primary debt holder of Horizon Dynamics through the fund you granted me access to. I orchestrated the SEC filing, the bankruptcy, and the sale of all your assets." The final blow was not financial, but purely moral. Anna reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the object she had kept for 7 years, the crumpled $100 bill. She held it in the air for a second, allowing the light to reflect the 7-year-old crease. She threw the bill into Blake's face. "Keep the change, Blake," she said, the words echoing throughout the ballroom through the microphone. "The real cost of your arrogance is not financial. It is the loss of your legacy and your dignity." In that instant, 2 federal agents, strategically positioned at the back of the room thanks to a tip from Anna, approached and handcuffed Blake. Blake was dragged off the stage under the shocked gaze of Tiffany, his wife, who began screaming hysterically, not out of pain, but out of concern for her own financial future. His son, Daniel, ran off the stage, unable to face the truth. His final sight was Anna, center stage, microphone in hand, the silent victor. He hadn't just lost his money, he had lost control of his life to the girl he called trash. Blake Harrison's arrest on the Wall Street stage was only the beginning of his punishment, but the true torment wasn't the bars. It was the loss of status. In just 48 hours, Blake's life was reduced to rubble, exactly as Chloe Davis's honor had been years before. Blake was taken to federal detention, but his deepest nightmare unfolded on the outside. His wife, Tiffany, who only valued his name and money, filed for divorce the same day, ensuring she would take the Greenwich mansion and all non-frozen assets. She abandoned him with the same coldness with which he had once discarded Chloe. His son, Daniel, the heir Blake tried to protect and elevate despite his incompetence, was exposed by Anna's documents. Instead of taking over Horizon Dynamics, Daniel was publicly humiliated and charged with criminal negligence, destroying not only his future, but the family legacy Blake had worked so hard to maintain. The worst punishment for Blake was not the cell, but the internal monologue forcing him to admit that his arrogance led him to trust the weakness of his chosen son, instead of the talent of the despised waitress. He lost the company, the marriage, his freedom, and the only thing he truly loved, his name. In prison, Blake's mind was collapsing. He looked at his inmate uniform, remembering the wine glass and the arrogance of scorning the fabric of Chloe's uniform. He realized, too late, that the $100 bill he had thrown at Chloe was the only price she demanded. The rest, the destruction of his empire, was just the change. While Blake languished, Anna Dubois, now publicly reclaiming her true name, Chloe Davis, assumed total control of Horizon Dynamics. She sat in Blake's imposing leather chair on the 50th floor and felt the weight of power. But unlike Blake, her gaze was not fixed on the floor, but on humanity. Chloe's first act was not to increase profit or punish executives, but to restore dignity. She oversaw the immediate injection of funds into the Foundation for Urban Progress, ensuring every dollar diverted was returned to the community. She fired the executives who were complicit with Blake and implemented a corporate culture of respect and merit, not status. Chloe did not become a tyrant. She became living proof that vision and empathy can coexist with power. In a final symbolic gesture, she removed Blake's most expensive trophy from its pedestal and replaced it with the simple frame containing the crumpled $100 bill. The frame was now the symbol of the new Horizon Dynamics, the reminder that a person's value is not determined by their social status, but by how they treat those who serve them. She looked out at the panoramic view of Chicago, and the final internal monologue of Anna/Chloe was one of peace, not triumph. I have paid the debt of my honor. I didn't just ruin one man, I saved the company from its own corruption. The waitress didn't beat the CEO, dignity beat arrogance. The story of Chloe Davis and Blake Harrison is a dark reminder that the universe keeps an implacable accounting. Blake wasn't taken down by a competitor, but by a memory. He lost his empire because he refused to acknowledge the humanity of a simple waitress. The true punishment wasn't the prison sentence, but the obligation to see the woman he called trash become the founder of his new legacy. What about you? Was the humiliation Blake suffered the only way for him to learn the true cost of his arrogance? Or did Chloe's revenge go too far by completely destroying his life? Should revenge have limits? Leave your honest comment below. Your opinion on the boundaries of justice is what makes these stories so real and profound. If this narrative of patient revenge, power, and redemption touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button so we can continue to explore the high-impact dramas that life has in store for us. Thank you for watching.